So you just got your hands on a copy of PreSonus Studio One. You open up the software and you're just essentially overwhelmed. From what you thought was going to be a very simple process of recording your favorite song, maybe recording an original song of your own, making a beat, or recording that latest and greatest podcast, maybe it's been a little bit overwhelming for you. Well, every now and then I like to make videos just like this for a beginner, as if you're here in the room with me watching over my shoulder. So every single step of this process, we're going to break down PreSonus Studio One, the most basic features that you need to know to get up and recording. If you've been using the software for a while, I want to recommend that you also continue to watch this video because there's going to be several things that I cover in this video that I haven't covered in previous renditions of this video. My name is Chris Green. My channel is all about practical tips and advice for playing and recording music. If you're new to Studio One or you're looking for more advanced features, I want to highly recommend that you hit the like and subscribe buttons. You'll see many of my videos that I've already recorded will be recommended to you. Those will be deep dives into the weeds of PreSonus Studio One, more advanced features that I will not be covering in this video. But this video is essentially for everyone out there that has their new copy of Studio One. Maybe you've been frustrated with the get up and going process and you're just looking for the basics. So you'll be able to follow along with me. You'll be able to see on screen every time I'm clicking something. You'll be able to see here on my desk every time I'm making some sort of adjustment. I want to show you how to get up and running with Studio One, and that's all in today's video. Again, I only ask that you hit the like and subscribe buttons. Let's get started. So the first thing you want to do is obviously open up your version of PreSonus Studio One. I've been using PreSonus Studio One since version 3, version 4, version 5, version 6, and now version 7. Everything I'm covering in today's video is going to be applicable no matter what version of Studio One you're using. Even the artist version of Studio One, which has been recently removed. If you happen to be using Studio One Artist, I'll cover all the basics on that as well. Okay, here we are at the home page. On the home page, obviously you can put your own little mugshot of whatever you want to put for your face. We see here our recent files. Recent files are projects you've been working on recently. That's always good to clean it up every now and then. If you have a bunch of project files and it looks a little crazy, just simply right click any of these that you might see and you can go down to remove from recent files list. That's just going to keep it looking a lot cleaner. It's not going to delete the project, but it'll make it look cleaner. So the main things I want to cover on the home page have to do with here, the new project button. You're going to be using that pretty much every single time you're using Studio One, so that's very important. You can also open up another project. So if someone sent you a project or you've got one on an external drive, you simply navigate to open. If you don't see your project on the recent files list, definitely go to open, navigate through your Finder or your File Explorer, find the project, you can open it from there. Okay, the main part of the home page that you need to familiarize yourself with the most is under the Setup tab. As you can see, I have my Universal Audio Thunderbolt interface. Okay, so this is where we talk about our audio interfaces. If you don't know what an audio interface is, the most basic way I can describe it is that an audio interface is going to take analog signals, such as me playing my guitar in front of this microphone here. It's taking what is analog and it's converting it to a digital signal. So audio interfaces come in different forms and sizes, but essentially you want to look at how many inputs do you have on your audio interface. This here is a 2-channel audio interface. That's why it's called the Apollo Twin Duo. I could plug 2 microphones or 2 guitars straight into this audio interface at the same time, and then that is being converted into a digital signal and being sent through this Thunderbolt cable to my MacBook. So everything I'm doing today is on a Mac computer. Everything from Windows as well. I also have a PC running Studio One. Everything is pretty much the same. It's just when it comes down to the command key. So on a Windows machine, I believe command and control can be used interchangeably, whichever one you're using. But anyway, my main audio interface is the Universal Audio Thunderbolt interface. If you're using an audio interface, you want to make sure that it is here under the Setup tab. So I'm going to click where it has my audio interface, and this will bring up our audio setup window. Okay, so navigate to where it says audio setup, and we want to go to the audio device tab. Here you need to select your audio device. So my device, of course, is the Universal Audio Thunderbolt interface. If you're looking for an audio interface, I highly recommend the AudioBox 96 from PreSonus. I have links below this video that is made by PreSonus. It's a USB 2-channel audio interface. It's very affordable. It's about under $100, whereas something like this cost me around $700. You can, of course, spend lots of money. But if you're just starting out, I highly recommend set your budget around $100 just so you can get into the ballpark. And then you can save your money for something more expensive later. But your playback device is what you're going to be listening through. So this audio interface has a headphone jack, and I am a big fan of using headphones. I can also plug in speakers or monitors if I want to, but my playback device is what I'm going to be listening through. So if I open up the playback device window, I have an option where I can play audio through my Dell monitor if I want. I don't know why you would choose that. That would be pretty terrible. I also have my MacBook Pro speakers. So if you're using your laptop and you don't have an audio interface, go ahead and select your speakers or your headphone jack for your laptop. I've done that many times. You can also use your AirPods. So if you have AirPods Pro, I've been using those many times with my laptop. But my playback device is my Universal Audio Thunderbolt. My recording device, what I'm inputting audio into, is also my Thunderbolt audio interface. We'll get to some more stuff as we create our session. Device block size, I highly recommend you set it to about 512 samples. Try to leave it there as much as possible. You can change these settings later on, not to get into the weeds, but basically the higher the samples or block size, the more resources that your computer is going to be using to process audio. If you go with something like 16 or 32 samples, what you may find is that your audio is popping. In your headphones, you'll just hear stuff that sounds like static or popping sounds all over the place. It's very annoying. That's showing that your computer is basically being overloaded. It doesn't have enough resources. It doesn't have enough power being sent to it so that you can process audio. So when in doubt, set it to 512 and just move on. There are implications. The lower you set your samples or your block size, the faster the audio is going to be, like the less delay you're going to hear in your headphones. But I've got a workaround that works great for me, and I'll show you that process as well. But when in doubt, just set it to 512. And then if you hear any glitches in your audio, set this to something like 1024. You can try that out as well, okay? All right, we'll get to some more of these settings a little bit later. Dropout protection, I always have this set to maximum. Also, this is going to depend on what kind of computer, what kind of audio interface you're using. If you can copy my samples, that would be my settings for samples, that would be great, because I know it works, or at least it works with my machine, okay? Once you're done with this stuff, just simply hit OK. We'll come to a few more settings once we start our session. But essentially, when you open up the home page, just do a quick look at the home page and make sure that your audio interface is showing up. If it's not, it might mean that your audio interface is unplugged and not powered on. All right, we'll get to some more stuff in just a little bit. If you want to check for updates, you can simply click this button at the bottom of the screen. You don't always have to update. But let's go to creating our first project. So right here at the top, I'm going to click New. As soon as I click New, it's going to ask me, do I want to use a template? If you're interested in using my template, you can simply download it below. There'll be links in this description of this video. You can look at the Head Start program. It's basically just a template. It's going to have all your tracks laid out for you, color coding, all that kind of fun stuff. For today's video, I'm just going to go with the basic template, nothing fancy. I want to start here on the right where it says name. So you're going to want to name your project. Always try and give it a name. Don't let it be the default where it's just a bunch of numbers and gibberish. Even if you have to call it something silly, just call it something silly. Today, for singing purposes and not getting this video destroyed on YouTube, I'm going to choose something that is in the public domain. I'm going to sing a little bit of the hymn, How Great Thou Art. Seems to have worked in many of my videos where YouTube is not flagging it and I'm not getting raked through the coals. So I'll just call this one, How Great Thou Art. That's funny spelling right there. Let me change that to uppercase. All right, now below the name of your song, it's going to ask, where do you want to save your song session? This is very important because if you have an external drive, if you have like an SSD, these are the ones from, I believe it's Glyph, Glyph. This is their G drive. I've been using this one for a while in different renditions of it. If you have an external SSD, this is where I would highly recommend that you plug something like this into your computer and you want to save your session to an external drive. Now, my MacBook is brand new. This is an M3 MacBook Pro, and it has a 1 terabyte solid state drive internally. I'm going to usually, for videos like this, I'm just going to save it to the system drive because I can always move stuff around later. These are not big projects, but if you're working on an album, if you're working on something that's very important that you transfer your files, just go ahead and put it on an external SSD. So that way it's not bogging down your internal storage. Especially if you have one of these MacBooks that has like 256 gigabytes on it, that's really low. And once you start adding more and more audio tracks, those files are going to take up a lot of space. So I highly recommend check out some sort of external drive if you can. But essentially, when you click this button right here, these three dots, it's going to ask you where do you want to save your music, and you can navigate to whatever folder you wish, and then just save it there. Create a new folder if you desire. Okay. By default, it's going to go to your documents folder. You'll have a folder called Studio One and then My Song or Songs folder. It'll be in there. So yeah, mine's being saved to Documents, Studio One, and then there's a folder called Songs. Sample rate. 9 times out of 10, just set it to 48 kilohertz. You could record at 44.1 and be just fine. The higher your sample rate, the larger your file size is going to be. If you're in some sort of really professional situation, like you're working on some sort of movie or your podcast and you really want it to hit, they used to have something on iTunes or Apple Music where it was like hi-fi audio, but you had to have it at 96K. Just make sure you're complying with whatever rules you need, but 48 kilohertz, 9 times out of 10 is going to be just fine. Resolution, 24-bit should be fine. That's how much dynamic range you're going to have without clipping. 32-bit float, it will put a little bit more processing strain on your computer. Length, about 5 minutes is usually good for most projects out there. If you're doing something like podcasts and you want to change this to 60 minutes, you can change it there. Tempo is not going to matter too much right now. Set it to whatever number you want. That's how fast the quarter notes are. And then time signature, 9 times out of 10, probably in 4/4. Your key signature, if you want to set what key you're in, I know today's video, we're going to be in the key of G. All right, and then stretch audio files to tempo. Stretch audio files to tempo. The only reason you should check this box is if you plan on using a lot of loops and samples that need to be conformed to whatever your time base is, okay? So if you are just recording your own music, you're recording it all live, you're not using samples that you found on the internet, you're not dragging and dropping audio tracks into your session, you could just leave this unchecked. If you're somebody that does a lot of stuff with beats and you found a beat online that's at 88 beats per minute and your song is actually 90 beats per minute, if you have this button checked, it will stretch that 88 beats per minute track. It will stretch it so that it is exactly 90 beats per minute. So if you do a lot of sampling, if you're going to use loops and sounds from other people, go ahead and check this box. If not, leave it unchecked. Okay. From there, you're just going to click OK. As soon as you do, you're going to be met with a brand new session in PreSonus Studio One. This is always a fun canvas to look at before you create something awesome. All right, let's go a brief overview of what you're seeing here. On the right, we have our Browse tab. The Browse tab is essentially like the Finder window. If you're using a Mac or File Explorer, you're just going to be able to quickly access files and different settings and plugins that you might need in the future. We'll be going to this in a little bit from now, but just so you know, it's got instruments. Instruments are essentially it's not like this guitar here in the room. That's not what it means by instruments. It means virtual instruments, instruments that are coming from your computer, like a synthesizer or a violin or a trombone sound. That would be found here. So if you have any virtual instruments, you can check those out. PreSonus have their own virtual instruments, depending on what version you're using. Today, we might check out their Presence and their Impact drums sampler. Those are pretty good as well. Impact is going to have most of your drums, like stomps, claps, kick drums, that kind of thing. Presence is going to have keyboards, synthesizers, anything that you would play with the keys. You can find that on Presence, okay? All right, next we have effects. Effects are what they sound like. You're going to have reverb, compression, EQ. We'll get to those in just a little bit. I hardly ever use the Browse tab when it comes to putting things like that on. Studio One does come with a bunch of loops, and you'll have loops that come with your Splice version. If you're using Splice, that is version 7 of PreSonus Studio One. They have this integrated now. Not using that one a whole lot. And then also you can just navigate through your files that are on your computer. But for me, I'm just going to go down to the Browse tab and I'm going to click Browse so that it hides the browse window. I don't want to be looking at that all of the time. At the bottom of the screen, you have all of your transport controls. So the main things you're going to be looking at are this white circle. This is your record button. So whenever you're ready to record, you're going to want to hit the white circle. Whenever the circle turns red, that means it is recording. You have play, stop, and then this one here, which will take you back to the 0 part of your session, the very beginning of your session. All right, this one here, this is a loop activate. I never really click this one down here. You can just use the question mark or the slash key on your keyboard. That should turn it on. You'll have to set a loop region, which we'll get to in just a little bit. The only other important things over here are the metronome. Okay, metronome is going to be the click track that you're hearing in your headphones. We'll get to that in just a little bit. We need to add some tracks first. Over here on the left, we have the performance meter. So if your computer is being bogged down, you're going to see this thing spiking up. The more tracks you add, the more you're going to see, the more plugins you use, the more you're going to see the performance meter start to spike. You can just click where it says performance and it will give you a readout of how your computer is doing. So right now my computer, even though we're recording an on-screen recording, there's stuff happening in the background. My CPU is sitting at a fun 1%. So isn't it awesome? Computers have gotten very great over the years. I'm very happy with this one. All right. At the top, we have several icons that we're going to get to as we're recording more and more music. The main one that you're going to concern yourself with is the Add Tracks button. So every time you have a source that you want to record, it will need its own track. If you're recording acoustic guitar, that would be one track. If I'm recording a vocal, that will be one track, etc. Up here also, you have the inspector. So the inspector window is giving you a shortcut to access plugins and different ways of processing your audio. Again, some of this stuff, as I'm doing this overview, it may not make a lot of sense, but as we start adding instruments, as we start recording our voice or we start recording vocals, these things will come back into play and they'll make a lot more sense. You'll be able to see more things happening. Okay, at the top of the screen, we have our timeline, okay? So the timeline, you can zoom in here. As you can see, we have quarter notes. If you ever need to change it, just right click anywhere in the ruler, go to time base, set it to bars, and then 9 times out of 10 bars and quarter note, okay? You can advance this more if you want to have it show you 16th notes. As you can see, there's more dots being portrayed. So as your music or as your stuff is recording, it's going to be moving from left to right all the way across the screen. And again, if you want to change what you're looking at, just right click and go to time base, change it to bars, quarter note. Then if you want to zoom in and zoom out, just put your mouse anywhere on the ruler, click and drag up, and that will zoom out. Click and drag down, and you can zoom in and get real close and personal with your audio tracks. Okay, there's a few more things we need to get to and we need to address before we can actually start making music and making noise here in Studio One. First thing I want you to do is go up to Song and then Song Setup. This is a very important setting. So some of this is going to look familiar from when we were going over this earlier, but now that we're in our session, we can make some adjustments. So again, we're at 48 kilohertz for our sample rate. Our record format is 24-bit. And then we're going to go over to audio input output setup. This is a very important page because basically we need to tell Studio One how our audio is being routed. By default, if you haven't gone into this setting before, everything should be laid out for you pretty simply, especially if you have a 2-channel audio interface. Hopefully everything is already configured for you. Now, do not look at my settings and try to copy my settings because mine is being specifically set up for this YouTube experience, okay? So don't try to make everything on your screen look exactly like mine. The best thing I can do is to explain to you what these different things mean. So here on the right, you can see as I'm speaking, it's picking up this SM57. You can see this blue bar here on the screen. That's coming in through the first channel of my Apollo interface. So on the left, we have this Apollo 1. That is my first channel. The second channel is Apollo 2. Okay, so that's the second microphone input of my audio interface. For most of you out there, you'll probably only be seeing input 1, input 2, and then you'll also see a combination of the two, which is often referred to as input 1 plus 2. Again, mine is a quirky setup because I'm recording all of this stuff happening in real time for the sake of the tutorial. So mine says monitor left and right, and you see that on channels 1 and 2. Essentially, you want to have a channel for each of your inputs. So if I wanted to add an input, I can go down here where it says add mono. If I want to add mono, that is one channel. So let's say you have a 3-channel audio interface. If you only have 2 channels showing up, you need to add the third. Just click add mono. As soon as you do, at the bottom, you'll see this one that says input 1, and then on the far right, it just added a spot. So we need to basically coordinate your x-axis with your y-axis. The y-axis is the literal routing name for your audio interface. So at the top, this one says monitor left, monitor right, microphone / line / high Z 1, microphone / line 2, and then virtual channels, ADAT channels, auxiliary channels, and talkback. These names cannot be changed within PreSonus Studio One. That's what comes factory from my universal audio interface. These names on the left can actually be renamed. So I can change this one. Instead of it saying input 1, I can make it say input 3. I could also make it say SM7B. You can name it the microphone. You can name it, if you are doing something consistently with the same person, I can call this Chris Talking Mic. Name it whatever you want. The name on the left column doesn't matter near as much as where you're telling, where's that audio being sent to, okay? So if my talking mic is plugged into the channel 1 of this audio interface, I would then need to make sure that where it says Chris Talking Mic, I need to make sure that it is set to mic line high Z 1, which is the first channel of my audio interface. So I would have that there. If I hit apply, you can now see that if I tap this SM57, we're now seeing it where it says Chris Talking Mic, making some activity. But then back up here at the top, we have these two routed to the exact same setting. So this would cause lots of problems. I'm gonna go ahead and delete this before it gets crazy. Essentially what yours needs to look like is yours probably is gonna have input 1, input 2, and then you need to have a mono, and then a stereo option. Okay, I hope that makes sense to you. If you need help setting up your audio interface, I do have a video on my channel specifically about the audio box from PreSonus. It'll go through the same thing of setting up that 2-channel interface. You can check that out when you have the time. As soon as your settings have been set, make sure you hit apply. Then we want to go to our outputs. So mine is very simple. I simply have my main output coming out of the monitor left and right, and that'll also apply with my headphone mix. So everything I listen through in my headphones is also being sent to the speaker out. I don't have any speakers set up in this room. I'm just using headphones, so that's fine with me. Once that is good, you've got your monitor set up, you got your inputs and outputs set up, click OK, because now it's time to actually start recording sound, okay? So like I said before, you'll be able to see this on the top view camera. Here is my SM57 from Shure. This is one of the most common go-to microphones you will ever find out there. If you're into recording instruments or you want to start a studio, I highly recommend get your hands on an SM57 if you can. So I'm going to have this on this boom stand here below me. This is quick access for my guitar. So as I'm recording the acoustic guitar in just a few minutes, I have this here on a boom stand. As you can see on my audio interface, we have a nice signal coming in over the top. I can see these pretty 2 green LEDs. Is a readout, so as I'm speaking, I can see the audio coming in. On the screen, back in Studio One, if we click the Mix tab, we can actually monitor our inputs and outputs right here. So this button that has an arrow and a vertical line, it'll open up our input metering. As I'm speaking into the SM57, you can see this white line hovering around -24. That's kind of our RMS, that's our average reading. And you need to adjust the gain or the input knob of whatever interface you're using. You need to make this adjustment so that rather than your signal being down here, being very low, where now my RMS is hovering around 40, I actually need this thing to be much higher. So I'm going to increase my gain as I'm speaking so that my peak values are somewhere around -12. My RMS value is somewhere hovering around this -24 area. Of course, if you're singing or if you're playing an instrument, this will also need to be changed. So make sure you memorize that function. Open up your mix window and then click this button here to show inputs. So anytime you need to check your gain settings, make sure you have this open to check. Okay, now we need to add a track. So you can hit T on your keyboard or the plus button here. Let's start the process of adding a track. So the first thing I want to record is acoustic guitar. So I'm going to name this track acoustic. I want one acoustic guitar track, and I want it to be yellow. You can choose whatever color you want for your track. Format is mono, 9 times out of 10. I don't want to have any presets loaded. And my input is whatever we set earlier. So I have this one set to Apollo 1, which is the first input on my Apollo. Yours will most likely say input 1. From there, I just want to click OK. As soon as I do, if I open up the mix window, we now have a fader. So if you're used to using a live console, if you're used to doing live sound, the mix window is going to look more and more like a live sound console or a PA system as we add more tracks. So up here, we have another button for record. This is actually the record enable button. If I hit record right now on this session, there won't be any audio being recorded. That's because we haven't armed the track to record. So if you want to arm the track for recording, just simply go up and click this button here. As soon as you do, you'll see the meter start to lift off. We see this green signal coming in from the SM57. Not only that, but the blue speaker icon comes on. Now this is software monitoring, and this is where you may come into some hold-ups, because when it comes to software monitoring often has a delay. The delay is based on your computer's ability to process audio. So I'm going to put my headphones in here. You can also use more traditional over-ear headphones if you've got a pair like these. Whatever sort of headphones you're using, plug them into your audio interface and make sure you've got a pair in. And as I put my headphones in, I can actually hear the SM57. So right now on this video, I'm going to unmute the audio with the SM57 and it'll be paired with my camera. So now you're hearing what I'm hearing in my ears, which is a mess. I'm hearing all this delay happening because there is latency with the SM57. Now, if you set your settings, I'm going to go ahead and turn this off. So if you want to avoid software monitoring, just turn off the blue speaker icon. As soon as I do, now I'm not hearing the SM57 in my ears. Okay, we're going to come back to it in just a minute. Studio's workaround, if you are stuck with software monitoring, like if you have the PreSonus audio box or your interface doesn't have a direct monitoring option on it, most of them do. But at the bottom right of the mix window, if you open up the mix window on the main tab, you'll see this Z. Okay, if I click this Z, I will enable low latency monitoring. When I click this button, what it's basically doing is allocating more resources to my computer so that we can take whatever settings are on PreSonus Studio One and we make things a lot faster. It is accommodating for the delay. So if I go back up to this blue speaker icon, if I turn it on, testing 1, 2, now you're hearing both the SM57 and the camera's audio, and there's not near as much a delay. I can still function and speak to you even with this setting. So again, if you're stuck with software monitoring and you need a workaround, it was very important. That's why I mentioned earlier in this video, when we're going into our processing under audio setup, if you go into preferences, if you're on processing, make sure you set this dropout protection to maximum, and then make sure you have enable low latency monitoring for instruments selected, and then you'll see the options available for this green Z. I'm not even sure what they call it, why it's a green Z, but low latency monitoring. Okay, that's a workaround. Now I'll tell you also, my audio interface, the Universal Audio Console app, it has its own version of direct monitoring that I can access at any time. So I'm not personally bound to having to use monitoring from Studio One. I can just use monitoring from the console window itself. If I unmute this track here, test 1, 2, I can now hear things at near zero latency simply from the console app. The downside of this is that whenever I want to adjust my headphone mix of what I'm hearing, I have to bounce back and forth between PreSonus Studio One and Universal Audio Console, okay? Your audio interface will probably have its own way of working with direct monitoring, but I wanted to show you that for low latency monitoring, because from here on out, I'll keep this low latency monitoring switch turned on when I'm recording. So that way, hopefully if you're using Studio One, you have access to that as well. You can record. So now I need to grab my acoustic guitar. For this video, I'm using my wife's Taylor GS Mini. Like I said before, I've got the SM57 here, just about as high as the neck is on my guitar. I'm going to play just a little bit to make sure that my metering is not going crazy. So I'm going to open up the input monitoring. As you can see, we spiked there. You never want to see this red rectangle for clipping. That's always a bad thing. But if I play a little bit of guitar, that's pretty good. So the settings I had set up for my talking worked pretty well for the acoustic guitar. So, all right, before we hit record, I need to set up my click track. So they've referred to it as the metronome. Down here, there's a little wrench. I'm going to click this. Here you can see the settings for your click track. So if I hit C on the keyboard, I will enable this blue icon for metronome. So if I hit spacebar with the blue metronome icon turned on, you should hear a really loud click track. Okay, the way to turn that click track down, you go to your mix tab, and over here by the main output, you see this click volume. It's very small, but right here where it says click volume, I can click and drag this down, and instead of it being 0, I want it to be more like -14, -15. So if I hit spacebar again, that's a lot more manageable. I can hear what I'm doing on top of that. Now, if you don't like the sound of your metronome, you can go up here where it has your accent, and you can change this sound to, I can make it a cowbell. So if we make it a cowbell and a marimba. Okay, so for the sake of this video, I'm going to have this one set to Logical 1 and Logical 2. So that's going to be familiar if you've used Logic before. It's using the same sort of click track. Also with GarageBand, it's also pretty similar. So we need to turn this one off. All right, we're going to go back to our acoustic guitar. One of the settings on the keyboard that you're going to use quite a bit is this arrow pointing to the left. It does the same thing as return to 0. It's going to take you back to the beginning. So if I have clicked on measure 8 and I hit this button, it takes me all the way back to the beginning. Measure 8, back to the beginning. Measure 10.5, back to the beginning. Also at the beginning, I'm going to put both of my headphones in, and I'm going to record some acoustic guitar. All I need to do when I'm ready is hit this white circle at the bottom. I'll let it play a few measures, and then I'm just going to play the ending of How Great Thou Art. All right, that felt pretty fast to me. We can go back to the beginning. As soon as you're done recording, just hit the space bar. To go back to the beginning, press the left arrow again. We can hit the space bar and take a listen. All right, again, that felt pretty fast, but it's okay for today's video. Now, it looks like there's not a lot of signal on the screen. What we can do to expand our view is down here at the bottom right, just above the Browse tab, there's this little burger stack. It's called Data Zoom. So if I drag this up, now you can see those are the waveforms of what we just recorded. It looks very small because we're not recording very hot signals, okay? I don't want to be clipping, so this is something I'm pretty used to seeing. All right, now instead of the acoustic guitar, let's go ahead and add a vocal. So I'm going to sing a little bit with this. The quickest thing to do is simply just right-click anywhere where it says your acoustic track and go to Duplicate Track. If I double click here where it says Acoustic 2, I can rename this and say Chris Singing. Then I'm going to record enable. And then, and very importantly, we want to disable the record enable for the acoustic track. I don't want to be re-recording over the acoustic track. So I'm going to take the same SM57 here. The settings worked out pretty good. Do have a little bit of a delay, but that's okay. I check my levels. How great thou art. Yep, should be fine, okay. Watchers and subscribers of my channel, they know that singing is not my forte, but if it helps, I'll do a little bit of singing. Okay, so we've got our acoustic guitar track. I want to return to the beginning using that left arrow again. I've got this record enabled. I'm gonna change the color here so I can just left click. Let's make my lead vocal light blue. Okay, let's give this a try. So whenever I'm ready, I can just hit the C key to turn the metronome on, put my headphones in, and I'll hit record.
How great thou art, how great thou art.
Okay, and when you're done, make sure you turn off the software monitoring. And since I'm not doing really much anymore like analog recording, I'm gonna go ahead and turn off the low latency monitoring switch. So that Z is now off. That'll do for now. Let's add some MIDI instruments. So this is where we need to set up our external instrument. I've got an M Audio. This is an Oxygen 25. I've just had this little MIDI controller for quite a while. Whatever controller you're using, make sure that it's plugged in either USB or you have your MIDI interface plugged in. You're going to want to go to Song, and then we need to go to Song Setup, Preferences, External devices. Right now you see we don't have any external devices set up. So on external devices, I want to click Add. I want to add a new keyboard. I know that my keyboard is not on this list. The manufacturer I'll name is M Audio. The device name, I always call this one Oxygen 25. All right, MIDI channels, all of them. Receive from, so you should see your MIDI controller or your keyboard should be listed. If it's not, make sure you have the USB plugged in, and maybe you need to reboot PreSonus Studio One. And then send to, this one doesn't have any built-in sounds, so I could set it to send to, but I'm not going to be using that function at all. If your keyboard, like if you're using one of those Nord keyboards, you've got sounds that you want to use from your keyboard, certainly have that set to send to. You can send MIDI information to it. It'll play it itself, etc. When I'm done, I click OK. So now I've got this thing selected. I can click OK. So now whenever I add a virtual instrument, my default instrument is going to be the M Audio Oxygen keyboard. I'll open up the Browse tab, and I'll tell you what. Let's go to Instruments, and this is one that you get included with Studio One. This is under Presence. I'm just going to click and drag it onto the screen, and now we can see this is the Presence virtual instrument. If we go up here at the top where it has default, this is a preset. I can change my preset to Artist Instruments. Let's add a synthesizer. That would be fun. Let's go with this one called Big Pad. It's pretty massive. These things are always way too loud, so I'm going to turn the volume down to about -12 there on the right. You can filter with this, mess around this whole video. I'm not going to break down every virtual instrument, but if I turn on this filter, I want to use a high cut filter. Go back to the beginning of the song, and I'll make sure my metronome is turned on with the C key, and let's play some keyboard.
How great thou art, how great thou art.
Okay, as soon as I hit spacebar, now instead of seeing these waves on the screen, we're seeing these rectangle blocks. If I double click this, we now have the edit window open. The edit window is where we're going to see all of our MIDI notes. So as you can see, I grabbed this time base. What do you call it again? Your time meter. This ruler here, and I'm just going to drag it up so I can see all of my MIDI notes here. So this sees how I performed. And as you can see, I did not hit this right when the note started. It was supposed to start right on beat 3. As you can see, I was very sloppy. It's actually not that bad, but one thing you can do that you'll find yourself doing quite a lot with MIDI instruments, if I click and drag and I select all of these MIDI notes and I hit the Q key, watch how they all shift into place. Okay, now these have all shifted. They didn't shift where I wanted them to though, so I'm going to click and drag these and move them where they need to be. So the benefit of recording things via MIDI is that you can change your performance after the fact. to clean things up and make it less sloppy. And I might leave that one there, that last one. And not only that, if I click this keyboard here on the screen, I can go in and I can edit this instrument to sound completely different. If I want to change this, instead of the big pad, why don't we change it to smooth and silky? Okay, just click the preset, it will load. Now we can listen to what smooth and silky sounds like. That was kind of silly sounding. And one of the things I wanted to show you, I haven't mentioned this before, is if you hit the S key with any of your tracks selected, you can solo that track. So if you just want to listen to that track by itself, hit the S key. Now, if I want to listen to just me singing, I can click here at measure 4. I hit spacebar.
How great thou art.
So that's the solo function. Just hit the S on the keyboard, okay? Of course, with MIDI instruments, you can go crazy. You can add drum beats, synthesizers, bass guitar, whatever you want to do. But now we need to talk a little bit about the mixing process. So if I open up the mix window, I'm going to get rid of this input monitoring. Click and drag right here where you see it divides the screen in half. I'll drag this up a bit so that we have more access to what we're seeing. So here I've got my singing track. We'll start here. When it comes to mixing, I often like to set up a loop. It's easy to set a loop. Just go up to the transport meter again. I don't know why I can't think of the word for it, but it turns into a pencil tool. You want to click and drag this so that you capture whatever region you want to loop. So I'm going to loop just the part that I'm singing. As you can see, I've got this gray rectangle above the meter. And if I hit the question mark key or the slash key, it turns blue. When it's blue, the loop is active. And at the end of a loop, what it will do is it will continue to play for basically infinity until I'm ready for it to stop.
How great thou art. How great thou art.
Okay, so let's go ahead and turn off the record enable for that. If you're happy with your MIDI instrument performance, you can essentially just bounce this selection. So it'll change it. Instead of it being MIDI, now we're going to be dealing with some analog stuff. It'll look more similar to what I'm mixing with the acoustic guitar. So I'm going to bounce selection. Again, that was just a right click and then bounce selection, okay? So now we have this presence channel. I'm going to rename this one pad. This section right here has been grayed out. So this is no longer being affected. This has been muted. If I ever want to go back and record some more synthesizer, I can, it's there. But we're only concerning ourselves with, we'll change this to red, with this red track, blue track, and yellow track. Now for mixing, what we can do is we can actually start at the end. So everything is being funneled into what's called the main output or the main bus. Just above the main bus, there's a section called Inserts. I want you to click the plus button and navigate to where it says PreSonus. And I want you to click what says limiter. A limiter is basically going to keep your audio from clipping. And the benefit of this is that we can push the volume up as high as it will go without clipping so that we get the most amount of volume. So if I go ahead and hit play.
How great thou art.
You can see we're hovering around -12 or -9. So it'd be pretty easy for me to go to gain and I want to add, let's go ahead and add 9 decibels. This is going to make it a lot louder in my ears. So I'm going to turn down my headphone volume. Here we go.
How great thou art. How great thou art.
Now you can see it says reduction -4. That means that it tried to get above the limiter by 4 decibels, but the limiter smacked it down. I have no doubt, just even from looking at it, I can see that it's probably the pad. So on the pad, I'm going to clip gain this down by 4 decibels by going to where it has this white square in the middle of the screen. If I click and drag this down, we have -4 decibels. Now it starts to look a little bit more similar to my vocal. All right, so that's my main output, but I want to make changes along the way. So what I can do is I can select my pad channel. I can right click and go to add bus for selected channels. My acoustic bus, you can see it where it says main. It's basically asking where is the acoustic track going to go. I'm going to send my acoustic guitar. I want it to output to this bus 1. Bus 1, I'm going to rename. I'm going to call this one music. And if I solo this music bus, what you'll notice is something is missing. What's missing is the vocal, because now I have just my instruments going into a music bus. If I unmute the music bus, you can still hear the vocal.
How great thou art.
So a kind of advanced thing for you to do is to make use of bus tracks. I can right click any of my vocal tracks and say add bus for selected channels. I'm going to call this bus vocals. And you can do the same thing. I want to have my vocal track going into my vocals bus. So now if I solo the vocals bus, I should just hear vocal.
How great thou art.
And this is where it can get fun. If you have background vocals and layers and you want to put effects on all of them at the same time without having to do an EQ on every single one, you can use buses. So back on the vocal track, I want to EQ this a little bit. So I'm going to go to my inserts, and something I would typically do, I'd add PreSonus Pro EQ. And as the vocal is playing, I'm just going to mess with a little bit of EQ. So the thing I want to do first is I want to roll off with this low cut filter everything basically below 160 hertz. Also, something common you'll do is probably knock out some of the low mids and then give a little bit of a boost on top. It's a pretty common EQ move. I'm not being super selective here just for the sake of tutorial. I just want to show you what EQ can do. So if I solo my vocal track, here it is without the EQ.
How great thou art.
Here it is with the EQ.
How great thou art.
So it sounds a little bit thinner, but I'm trying to make it brighter and I'm trying to get it above all of the music tracks. The music tracks are pretty dark and low. Another thing you can do is just add on a compressor. I wanted to show you this because a lot of times early on, if you don't know how the plugins work, simply load an EQ, load a compressor, but then navigate to the presets folder. If I click where it says default, I can go into any of these settings and go to vocals, male vocal 1. Let's just use that preset and see what it does.
How great thou art. How great thou art.
So you can see that in effect. The only thing I had to do is bring down the threshold because the preset has no idea what information you're feeding it. It'll basically have everything set up, but you need to lower the threshold so that the compressor is active. The way you can tell the compressor is active, because you see this yellow bar on the right, that is your gain reduction. That is how much it is reducing by. You can see we're reducing as much as -7. I want you to be able to hear that for yourself. And of course, you can apply these things across the board. If I want to put an EQ on my acoustic guitar, I can drag and drop the EQ from the vocal over. It'll copy all the settings. Of course, I want my guitar to be EQ'd slightly different than my vocal. We'll give it a little bit more of a low end bump. And then something you may want to do on the entire mix is add reverb. So reverb is going to give you a sense of space, and PreSonus has one included called Room Reverb. I want to change the order of the plugins. I don't want to go to the limiter first, so I'm going to drag this Room Reverb over, put it before the limiter. I'm going to go into the default. I'll make it say, how about a concert hall? And with the reverb, I want to mess with the mix knob. As you can see, if I put the mix at 100%, this is what it sounds like.
How great thou art. How great thou art.
Let's bring that back down. So I'm going to toy with the mix knob a bit, get it something more around 14-15%.
How great thou art. How great thou art.
Okay, so you might be thinking, are we done with the song just yet? There's so much more you can do. I've covered this a lot in a bunch of my other videos. Just some quick tips of advice. Use the slice tool. If you hit 3 on your keyboard, your cursor will now turn into a slice or a knife. I can go in here and cut out a lot of these sections where nothing is happening. If you hold the shift key, it'll give you a lot of freedom. I can go in here, I can make these cuts. After I make the cuts, I can switch back to my cursor by hitting the 1 key. I can select these audio regions. I can delete them entirely. So now you can see we've just cleaned up the audio quite a bit. You can also zoom in to any of these and you can add what's called a fade. So if I click and drag from the top left, I can drag it over. You can put these little fades in just in case you're worried about popping. Just makes it sound a lot smoother when you have a fade. You can also fade out at the end. Way more advanced features, but when you talk about exporting your mix, so if you're happy with this mix and you say that your song is ready to go, basically you just need to go in here, and what I like to do is use the loop region. So I'll try to select a little bit before and a little bit after my last note of recording. So now I've got measures, the end of measure 2 all the way to the start of measure 11 selected. I'm going to go up to Song, Export, Mix Down. It'll ask me, what do I want to call the song? I'll call it How Great Thou Art. Final 1.1. I don't want to publish this. I just want to export a WAV file. A WAV file is going to be your highest quality of export. It'll be 24-bit 48K. That should essentially be the same quality that you've been hearing in your headphones the entire time. My export range will be a between the loop. And then if you want to export MP3s, you can also check off MP3. I just highly recommend, if you're doing MP3, at least go 48 kilohertz and have it set to 320 kilobytes per second. MP3s can get really mangled, but if you have to email somebody and they don't mind it being poor quality, you can definitely go with an MP3. Between the loop, and then I want to select OK. As soon as I hit OK, it has processed this, and now we can listen to our exported song.
How great thou art, how great thou art.
All right, everybody, we covered quite a bit here in this video, but I didn't get into nearly as many things as I wanted to in this video. So I highly recommend you go and watch this video just right here. This video is going to cover recording your first song in PreSonus Studio One. There will be a few things I mentioned in that video I didn't mention in this video, so make sure you head on over and give that video a watch. And if you haven't already, hit the like and subscribe buttons, and I'll see you next time here on the channel. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.